We expect to bring that back to the board. Our hope is that we can bring that back to the board in public session at our next school board meeting. That is our plan. Secondly, our director of guidance search is well underway. We have finalists that are with the committees being interviewed, and we expect to have an update to the board the Tuesday after vacation on where we stand with that process. Since our last meeting, we've had 2 retirements in the administrative front. Our Manor Haven principal has decided to retire at the end of the summer, and our director of ENL has announced her retirement effective July 1st. Those 2 search processes are underway, and we are in the stage right now where we're receiving applications, and they'll be reviewed once the posting is closed. The third item on the agenda is the online distance and remote learning. This policy is still under review by central office, so there's no further update at this time. If I may, I'll go on to the fourth item on the agenda. The social media relations draft policy. I shared that with our attorney, Howard Miller, and our attorney had some recommendations on edits. So let me share those with you today. First of all, he thought it was more appropriate to title the draft policy that you have as board member conduct on social media. Board member conduct on social media, because that's really what this policy is talking about. So he wanted it to be more specific. His second recommendation, and I imagine we'll have some conversation around this based on the conversations that led up to this draft. His second recommendation was that we remove number 4. And his rationale was that he didn't want to infringe upon any board members' First Amendment rights. And that board members are allowed to disagree publicly. So that's for your consideration. And then he also thought that we should remove the final paragraph, since we do have a very clearly defined chain of command policy that happened to be adopted at last night's board meeting and approved. And his final recommendation would be that under the cross-references, to maintain the cross-reference of the board member ethics, it's 2160, but remove the other cross-references that are in place there. So Ms. Brooks, I turn it back to you, because I'm sure there's a conversation to be had around these recommendations.
Thank you. As you were speaking, I didn't want to interrupt. Our technical director told us that there is an issue with YouTube streaming. So we are recording this session and we will upload it later. So just a note to let people know when they do finally tune in why they weren't able to get us live today. Okay, so thank you for that. I have my own thoughts, but
Deborah, I'm sorry to interrupt. We do have 2 attendees, so at least there are 2 people here with us.
Okay, good. Welcome. All right, so I always like to give other members an opportunity to speak before I make my own comments. Does anybody have a hand raised? I don't see any.
Yes, Julie does.
I see Julie. Okay. Julie, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just have a quick question, Dr. Shields, in Howard's comments, since he recommended getting rid of the last paragraph because we have a chain of command policy, and of course he had put that in there for a purpose which I don't recall what the intent was. Did he mention whether it would be acceptable to cross-reference that policy, or no, I guess he wants us to get rid of all, you said, right, of the cross-references that are listed, except for the board ethics?
Well, since he was recommending removing the final paragraph, he would also recommend removing the cross-reference to 1400 as well.
Okay.
The only cross-reference he was saying that we should probably keep is the 2160 board member ethics.
Okay, thanks. That was just my initial question. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, seeing no other hands raised, I'll make my comments. I don't object to the change in the title. First of all, thank you for coming back with the recommendations. These are recommendations and not must-haves. Is that correct?
Correct.
And from what I can hear, he's not suggesting that anything be added. So he hasn't seen any glaring omissions. I just want to be sure that when we tighten this up, he's not recommending, we're not missing anything that should be added. Okay, good. As regards number 4, there was, if I don't want to mischaracterize it, but I had sensed a tension among board members as to whether board members could publicly discuss a board action that had taken place or publicly on social media, and I understand that the attorney wants to make sure that board members have retained their free speech rights and can speak freely. So I thought that point number 4 was balancing the right to free speech while also ensuring that the board member respect the majority decision. And that's why those 2 lines are there. Oh, cute baby. And that's why those 2 lines are there. 1, to give board members the reassurance that the policy respects their right to speak openly and freely, but also reminding the board member that even though they may have had a dissenting opinion that they are allowed to discuss, they are obligated to respect and adhere to the majority opinion. For that reason, my preference would be to keep that paragraph in, that number 4. That's just my opinion. As regards the final paragraph, we wanted to make the public aware that social media is not within the chain of command. We continue to see complaints lodged on social media by the public, but they should not come to expect that just because they complain on social media, that means it will become a proper avenue for the chain of command. And so there's nothing in the chain of command policy that addresses that. And so I think either we massage this paragraph or move it to the chain of command policy that we just adopted last night to be clear so the public understands that Facebook is not the chain of command, Twitter is not the chain of command, so forth and so on. So those are my comments with respect to Mr. Miller's recommendations.
Could I ask a question?
I see Julie's hand is raised, sorry, Nora. And then Nora, I'll take you after Julie.
Sure, no, I'm sorry.
Julie?
I'm just going to go to your last comment about the chain of command paragraph. So if we do change the title of the policy as it was recommended to board member conduct on social media, I don't know that it's necessary to continue to remind the public then about the chain of command, because this is a policy for how board members should be acting. So it's not necessary for us to enlighten the public on that instance. So if we are changing the title, then I can see the deletion of the last paragraph. Just also, I have to say from the onset, I have always thought we should get rid of the language in bullet 4 for the reasons that I do think it, as it was explained by Dr. Shields per our attorney. And also I think it gets us into more of a sticky situation by having it in than a more flexible situation, which is the goal of overarching policies.
Nora? And then I see Larry and Rachel, but I don't know whose hand went up, and Emily, and I don't know whose hand went up first, so. But Nora?
Yeah, I was going to ask about that last paragraph also, considering that this is focused on the board's use of social media in their capacity as board members. But I also, and I apologize, I didn't have the policy open when you were talking about item 4. Deb, what were you suggesting? Were you suggesting to change something about that?
No, I was suggesting I was advocating my reasons for keeping number 4. I was explaining what I thought the purpose was and how the first sentence balanced with the second sentence.
Does respect, what is respect? I mean, what do we mean by respect? Like that we don't
If respect is not the appropriate word, that
don't trash it? I mean, I don't know what respect means, seriously. Like if, I mean, if we had a
respect
vote,
mean- we need to, so for example, I'll give you an example. So the only thing that comes to my mind is last year on the budget vote where there were 3 people on the board who didn't want the 1.99% and 4 people who did. And the 4 people who did were the majority, and so it became the 1.99. The 3 people who didn't want it were still entitled to their opinion, but once the majority voted, that then needed to become the prevailing view of the entire board, that it needed to be respected, that that was the will of the majority of the board. I don't know another word for respect. Maybe there's another word.
no, I understand what you're saying. I'm just thinking of a situation where like we publicly voted and everybody voted for it, but people have voiced their opinions that we should pierce the cap in your example. So if somebody thinks we should pierce the cap, if we're talking about it, publicly and say, what the number is going to be for this year, and then someone says, well, every year I say pierce the cap. I said it last year, but we didn't. Like, that's not disrespectful in my opinion.
Correct.
Respect
Correct.
is hard. It's about, I guess I'm thinking out loud, and which I shouldn't be doing and talking until
I guess it's you can't continue to advocate that to either to change the decision. It's the wheels are set in motion, and this is now the whole board. I guess I don't know how else to verbalize it. I just remember reading about it in board conduct, that this is what's required, that you can still have your opinion. However, you're now you're part of the whole board. So this is now your role is to respect this opinion, move forward. I don't know how else to explain it.
I think you're explaining it well. I just think it's sort of I don't know how to better say it either, but I do think there's some it could be interpreted in different ways.
I understand.
Definitely be
I
interpreted in
understand.
different ways. Okay, thanks.
And I guess that's if we keep it. If we don't keep this paragraph, then okay. Did you have anything else, Nora?
No, thanks.
Okay, sure. I don't know who was next, Emily, Larry, or Rachel. So
I know there were 2 other people ahead of me when I pressed the button, but
Oh,
I didn't see
it's
who.
Larry. It's Larry. I'll let Rachel go and then I'll go last.
No, there were
Okay,
definitely
Larry.
people ahead of me, so go ahead.
Larry, Rachel, Emily said she'll go last. Larry?
Okay, so what we're talking about here is how we want to operate as a board. And so if as a board, we, again, I have my free speech rights to say whatever I want. And if I want to vote no on a budget, I have the right to come out in public and say, I'm not voting yes on the budget. That does not necessarily make me a good board member. So as a member of the board, we have always chosen to support the majority when the majority raises their hand. And even if I would have preferred a different budget, once we support that budget, I support that budget. So I don't think we're chilling free speech. I think we're just voluntarily agreeing to behave in a certain way. There's no sanction against us. It doesn't say a board member who refuses to respect the decision of the board will be summarily dismissed. It doesn't say anything like that. It just says this is the way we've agreed to operate it. And and maybe there could be some sort of language. I mean, it does say as a general rule, board members are entitled to free speech. But but I do think, I think it's important to say that board members can't speak for the board, and on social media or anywhere. And I think, but other than that, I think it's okay to say this is the way we choose to operate, and this is the we voluntarily entered into this into this agreement, and we intend to obey it to the best of our abilities.
So where does that leave you with respect to point number 4, which is the bullet point we're talking about?
So yeah, I'm good on I'm good on number 4. I mean, perhaps the language could be tweaked a bit, but I don't know how to tweak it. But I'm fine with it.
Okay, Rachel?
I think our division on this is interesting because, of course, the reason that we wanted a policy is because we have some division on what our approach should be. In general, I suspect that the reason that our attorney is advising to remove number 4 is that lawyers are generally not in favor of having something that looks like a rule that at the end of the day is completely unenforceable. And number 4 is not enforceable because Larry's right. It's about how we want to function as a board and what makes a good board. And as one of the people who was in the minority group that thought that our budget last year was way too low, once it was a done deal, I supported it publicly, and I said over and over and again, I was voting for it because that's what's better for the school district. That's what's better for our community. If our community sees that the board overall is aligned, it creates less confusion about things like that are really important. I think that our attorney's problem with number 4 is that this is really, respect is the right loosey-goosey word. It's about board members respecting our positions of authority and doing what's best for the school district. But at the end of the day, if there is a face-off between whether we've shown that respect and our First Amendment rights, the First Amendment rights win. And we could have a board member who decides to say many things that the rest of us don't think are appropriate or productive or the best for the school district. And number 4 would not be enforceable, and it has no teeth. I do hear what everybody else is saying about wanting to somehow codify what we all learn when we go through new board member training, which is that there are rules about how a well-functioning board functions that helps the school district function well. So with that in mind, and hearing that other people like this, I'm wondering if there is a way we can reword it with the word encouraged in there, so that it's clear that we understand that we are not able to make an absolute rule here about what a board member can or cannot say publicly, but that we as a board are understanding that having board unity is good for the school district. And when I say board unity, for the people listening, I don't mean that we can't have our own opinions. We all have our own opinions. We all hopefully speak our own opinions. I think that it's perfectly fine that we have split votes sometimes too. I think it's fine for the public to understand that we're different people who have different takes on things. But when it comes to big issues and big projects of the school district, that we as a board are deciding that it is in the best interest of the district for us to have some alignment and look like we're standing together. So I don't have the full phrasing, but it seems like the word encouraged could be in there, and that might help. On the last paragraph, quickly, I understand Howard's comment. I think Julie hit exactly on it. It's that once it's about board member social media presence, it doesn't seem appropriate there. But I also understand Deborah's comment about wanting the community to understand this, so I'm open to putting it somewhere else.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to figure out where you would put the word encourage. Maybe you want to think about that while Emily speaks.
So
I think
wanna
it
bring
has
us
to
back.
be rephrased entirely.
I want to bring us back because this isn't what this whole point of this policy and the whole point of board member conduct on social media has nothing to do with board members going on social media and saying, I didn't support the budget. That's not what it's about. The whole reason we started having this discussion was so that we would encourage or have a policy in place that did not allow, and I guess I use the word allow, did not allow board members to engage engage with the public on social media on board member related business. And the examples are plenty, and this is where we do differ as a board, because some of us believe that it is our duty or it's within our right to go on to social media being Facebook or Instagram or whatnot, and have a discussion with community members that is board business related, not vote, board business. Let's forget the vote part, right? Board business related. And there are some of us that refer to the way we've done business in the past. Let's not even say that it's proper. The way we've done business in the past, where if a community member has a concern about board business or board discussions, board vote, that they typically would either come to a board meeting or would send an email or follow the chain of command for whatever their concern was. So this is where this is all started from and what we were trying to set in place. Now, that being said, you all know, no secret here, I'm one of the board members that didn't think we should be going on social media and having conversations about board business. We all know, no secrets here, that Rachel and I differed in this opinion, right? Rachel has gone on social media and had conversations about board business. So it's really a practice of the board as opposed to, I suppose, a rule of the board, right? And as Larry said, we have every right, and as our attorneys have said, we have every right as citizens to do as we wish. It's kind of interesting how the Senate trial that is taking place right now is kind of the same argument that, you can't infringe on people's First Amendment rights to speak and what their actions kind of bring about. So you didn't, Rachel,
I object strongly to that comparison. Strongly.
I knew I'd get
That's
you
a great
fired up on that
analogy.
one.
It's a terrible, inaccurate analogy.
I knew I'd
I
get
don't-
you fired up on that.
For the record, I don't
Anyway.
think any board member has ever
Wants any
incited an
insurgency?
insurrection.
I agree.
We haven't even
Agree.
incited any lobbying or protests or petitions.
Correct. I agree. I'm making that point that it's kind of funny that we're having this discussion today and there's the same type. Anyway, the point that I'm saying is I think Howard is correct. So I think we should say board member conduct on social media. I do believe that we should remove number 4 because no matter what we are saying about number 4, it says a board member may publicly describe a board discussion or action that took place during an open portion of a board meeting. In so doing, that board member must respect the majority decision. See, that's the part. The in so doing is basically infringing on a board member's right to speak up. Now, so I don't know what it means. When we're saying you're allowed to say whatever you want, I think it's more of a practice than it is a rule. And if this board just gets together and says, as a practice, we are all agreeing to not do this, then that's our practice. Next board may decide that the only way that they want to have discussions with the public is through Facebook. And then that's the will of the board. So I think the question is trying to kind of respect our rules and practices as opposed to setting a policy. Now, you all know I started this whole social media policy discussion. So I'm just saying I will respect Howard's opinion because he is our attorney on this. And so I would accept his changes.
Okay, Julie, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just was going to add for edification because I do think we are discussing conduct. And so I went to pull up the ethics policy, which does already have a statement in it that as a board member, you are accepting all board decisions once they are made and assist in carrying them out effectively. So that language already is covered. It is the first sentence about board discussions and being publicly described on social media. That is, of course, not covered in there, but I think that is actually not the crux of what we're all discussing or having a problem with as we go through this discussion. So there's a bit of redundancy if we are linking the ethics policy to it. And maybe that solves the problem or answers some of the question or makes people feel more comfortable on whether we should or should not have item 4 in this policy.
Nora?
I agree I agree with Julie, what she just said. And I also have to say, I was trying to find the policy before, and you said that Howard had suggested, our attorney had suggested taking out number 4. And I agree that number 4, I obviously I know what it's trying to do, but I don't think it's going to succeed as, you know, as it is. And I don't think it adds to it. And I think it just, it's not something that can be enforced. And it's something that is really a really like a personal decision, I think, at this point. I don't think we can enforce it. I mean, I think respect to fellow board members is something that we're always, that's the ideal. And respecting group decisions is the ideal, but I don't think we can legislate it through this policy.
Okay, so Julie, thank you for looping in the board member ethics. That's where I was trying to balance. It's probably where I got that. So, but I didn't remember it, but thank you. So personally, I don't have a problem taking that sentence out, but in listening to Emily, where Emily's saying, you know, if the majority of the board decides that we're not going to comment on social media, that decision, if there are 3 people who want to comment in whatever iteration of the board, you know, the board is going possibly to change within the next year or 5 years, whatever. And there may be a group that one year says, yeah, we're not going to comment on social media, majority rules. And what I think our attorney is saying is that's not appropriate, that whether we speak on social media or not, should not be subject to majority rule. The First Amendment is not subject to majority rule. I think, I mean, I wish he were here. I don't want to speak for him, but when Dr. Shields said that one of the attorney's concerns that we cannot infringe on Board of Ed member rights, and that we're allowed to disagree, that certainly is true in a board meeting, but is it also true in the supermarket, at Target, on social media, in a public venue? And so that concerned me. That raised a red flag for me, just as a lawyer, whether I was in the minority or the majority, in what that would look like. So I'm still stuck on keeping in this policy the fact that we need to acknowledge that a board member has the legal right to describe a board action or discussion, subject to the board member rules and ethics. So I just go back to that. I don't have a problem taking out the second line. I thought it was just to balance the first line. But I'm concerned that, you know, if there were a board that said, no, you know, we're not allowed to comment on social media, I don't know, that troubles me. And as for the chain of command,
Deborah, can you just say again, Deborah, can you just say again what you suggest the paragraph be?
well, Julie had mentioned taking out the second line.
Right, so
And so
you would
during the
like
board-
a board member may publicly describe a board discussion or action that took place during an open portion of a board meeting subject to ethics rules? Like what is, are you adding
no,
a subject to?
No, I wouldn't even have to add that. I mean, because it's,
Because we've gone down to the ethics, right?
it should go without saying that our behavior is subject to the ethics rules. That second sentence, as Julie pointed out, is a reiteration of one of the ethics rules that we are obligated to follow. And so Julie's point, and I agree with it, is it's redundant to have the second line because it's already part of our required ethics. But the first line would prevent a majority of whatever board from deciding that a board member cannot engage on social media. Because what the attorney is saying is that the board member has the First Amendment right to engage on social media. And one iteration of a board may vote 7-0. You can say whatever you want on social media. And another board might say 4-3. No, you're not allowed to comment on social media. And that, my understanding of what the attorney is saying, forget about my own First Amendment training, is that that would be an infringement on a board member's rights, that 4-3.
Okay, so you don't want to remove number 4. I'm saying, but here's the thing. What if we leave that line in? We are basically opening up the door to what created the reason to have this discussion to begin with, which was not opening the door. So it doesn't matter to me. I think we should just come to some sort of, in my opinion, consensus on whether or not we follow a lawyer's suggestion or not. But I just jumped in. I know Rachel and Julie had your hands up. I just didn't understand what the question was. What
I
the
think we're back to the
suggestion.
First Amendment right. I honestly, I think we're back to a constitutional issue.
Okay,
Forget about the
so-
second sentence, number 4. That was the first thing after changing the title that our attorney conveyed through Dr. Shields to the board.
He suggested we remove number 4 entirely. He did not
Entirely,
say
yes.
Correct. And
He did.
And I am saying that that I think that's the way to go. Rachel, you had her hand up, sorry.
Yes, Rachel, go ahead.
First of all, it's perfectly okay. I mean, I think sometimes it's okay if you're still being respectful, and it was important that you interject that question. So totally fine with it. I have a separate suggestion, because I think what we're stuck on is, I think at this point we're all clear that we can't infringe on the First Amendment rights, but we're stuck on the idea of having the board have a common understanding of the practice that particular board wants to observe. And I think it is important for a board functioning well to have respect and to have honesty and be able to have a straightforward understanding. So I don't know if there is some way for us to codify this, or if it's appropriate for us to, but what I'm thinking is that each year the board has a reorganization meeting, and before that reorganization meeting, the board has an executive session purely for reorganization. We don't do any board business per se. We only speak about our thoughts on how to run and organize the board, how the structure will be, what our priorities are for the year, things like that are not for public consumption. It's an appropriate executive session. And it seems to me that we could do ourselves and future boards a favor by having a sample list of agenda items that any board should be discussing during that reorganization meeting, things that we would want to have a common understanding on. I don't know if this goes in a policy, or if it goes in a regulation, or if it just gets passed from one set of officers to the next set of officers. But it seems to me this is something that would be on the list. Another thing that comes to mind for me is that for many, many years, this board, predating me, but when I first came on the board as well, had the internal policy of not endorsing Board of Education candidates. We felt that the board as a whole shouldn't be endorsing people who are running, because the board should not be stepping in, and individual board members should not be stepping into that race with that heavy a foot. And that's the kind of understanding, like this one, that a board should have on how they're going to move forward. Again, not enforceable by law. I think that falls within board member First Amendment rights as well. I think any board member would be well within their rights to say, you know what, I think this candidate is so good, and I do want to endorse them publicly, and the rest of the board couldn't do anything about it. but it's a kind of conversation that a board should have and understand as a group what everybody else's thoughts are on it and how to move forward. And the same with this. So maybe we want to put a pin in this and make some sort of internal document to make sure that we don't lose track of it, because at the end of the day, to have a board function well, the respect and the communication are the most important parts. I mean, Emily and I are sitting here. We know we're on completely opposite ends of the spectrum on this, but we're having the conversation and we know where we each stand. And probably because we have the conversation, we're better able to respect each other's positions and know where the other one is coming from. And that helps.
Okay, so there's a part of me that if we were to go to the point where we're saying we're not commenting on social media, it's a one-line policy. Board members are not permitted to comment on social media. So I'm confused here
Deb,
because
can I interject? I'm sorry. I think the point, I think what we're all trying to get to right now, and I think we need to move on, is that this is board member conduct on social media, as Howard suggested. And I think removing that paragraph number 4 basically does not infringe on anyone's rights. And that's to Rachel's point, to what I actually said as well, see, Rachel and I agreed earlier, is that this is a board practice on whether or not, and a rule amongst ourselves and an agreement amongst the board, if we're going on social media or not and discussing meetings. Let's just move on from this, because we're spending a lot of time discussing something that we all recognize. It's just amongst ourselves a decision that we make and how we operate. And so I think we should just remove. I'm going back to what I originally said. I think we should accept Howard's suggestions for changes and let's move on.
okay, and where do we remind the public that social media is not within the chain of command? Do we reopen? Do we amend the policy from that we
I
just
think
approved?
it's in our chain of command policy, is it
Doesn't-
not? That it doesn't it
There's
say
nothing
that?
in there that says social media is not within the chain of command. It says, here's what you do. You email so-and-so, 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 but it doesn't explicitly say.
Right,
But chain
Deborah,
of command, it's not mentioned as part of the chain of command. It's also not mentioned that you're supposed to call your congressman and your congressman's supposed to call the board. This is what you do. And we can't take every other possibility that anybody can come up with and say,
Okay,
Right.
you know,
okay,
Right.
all right. Okay, I'm just trying to be as explicit as possible. Okay, all right. So does the majority agree that number 4 comes out? Actually, does the majority agree that we follow all of the recommendations of the attorney?
Yes.
I see Julie saying yes, Emily saying yes.
Yes.
3. Anybody else? I need 4.
You've got thumbs up from Beth and Nora.
Okay, there we go. Okay. And so we'll also redact all of the cross references except for 2160 board member ethics. That one stays in and we move on. Okay. Next on the,
Nora has her hand up, Deb.
oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Go ahead, Nora.
I don't think that last, I mean, I know Larry said, and I understand that we don't have to put in there, you can, then you can go to, the local and state governments. But I do think that that's an important point just to bring home. And I don't think it would be bad to put that in the chain of command policy if it's not in there. I don't recall if it's in there. I'm talking about the last paragraph. I think it's worthwhile putting somewhere because it does, it's just helpful. I mean, it's, it's that we have it down there as a policy, like it's to remind people. But yeah, I don't think it has to go to waste. I don't think it belongs here, but it could be in the chain of command policy as a final paragraph.
So we could just take out one sentence and say social media platforms fall outside the chain of command or whatever it's called, and accordingly are not the proper venue for lodging formal public comments or complaints. And we'll add that to policy 1400.
I think that works. I don't know. That would be, I'm not going to die on the hill, but I think that works.
What does everybody else
Too.
think?
That's fine. That means you need to bring back chain of command.
Yes.
and just, but I recommend as an action step that we don't do, bringing it back to the committee, and what if we all agree to just add that one sentence to the chain of command, that we just put it back on for a first reading again?
Yep.
Okay, that's my record, just to save us some process time.
Yep, no problem. Do we all agree? So that sentence that begins with however, we take out however, we make the social S, capital S, social media platforms fall outside, so forth and so on. Okay. Sorry, my husband's doing business in the background. Okay. So
Well,
next
I'm
on
glad
the
somebody
agenda,
else's husband is being heard and just not mine.
well,
Okay,
we've got the schoolhouse in the front room, the office in the back, and the board meeting here. Okay.
excuse me, just to be clear. So
Yeah.
this policy, the 1130.1, is it going on for first reading, or would you like it to come back to the work session?
I think it could go on for first reading.
I think so too. Those
I think the
changes seem
deletions are
really
clear.
clean.
Yeah. And also put on for first reading again. Okay.
Right, and the 1400 is coming back to a first reading with the addition of that sentence. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can work with you on just where to plop that sentence in
Okay.
on the 1400. Okay, or Dr. Shields' calendar. Okay, thank you. So now the policies on policies. When we were last here, Emily had made the very good suggestion that we take the NISPA sample template and see and use that as the master and synthesize anything from our template that we thought should go in there. And basically, so I'm looking at policy 24, well, it's now called 2410, because that's the NISPA numbering. And basically our policy followed the NISPA policy. And so what I tried to do was put into italics the things from either our policy or other policies that might be appropriate to include. So,
I'm sorry, Deb, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm trying to follow along with what's in board docs. So what policy do you want us to open up in board docs?
2410.
Thank you. The one that says 2410, the first one. Okay, I just want to follow along. Thank you. Sorry.
It's type policy development, adoption, implementation review. So you'll see some things there in italics. I tried to show where the changes were, where the NISPA template might have had something that our template didn't have, and I indicate. So I'll go through. So for example, in the first line, the Board of Education, and I inserted as the legislative body of the district, is responsible for adopting. It just explains to the public that we're actually the legislature for the school district, basically. And then you'll see all the way down until the paragraph that says, before acting on any proposed policy. So all of this language is taken from the NISPA template, all of it. But at the very end, there's a sentence that says, at a minimum, the superintendent shall seek input on all policy initiatives. That's in the NISPA template. And I italicize it, but it wasn't in our current policy. So that's why I italicized it, because I didn't know if the board wanted to accept that part of the NISPA template or not. Julia, I see your hand raised.
So I also think the other part of this conversation, right, weren't we kind of marrying the NISBA template and also our policies 2410, which were formulation, adoption, and amendment, and 2420, because to the point that you just made with the, that the superintendent shall seek input on all policy initiatives from the following groups. Under policy, our policy 2410, it's the superintendent should base their recommendations and input based on outcomes of studies or judgment of professional staff or study committees. So it's almost like, right, we're marrying all of these together to incorporate that language, correct? Am I also understanding that correctly?
what Emily
That's what I
said.
think I think that, I'm sorry. I think, yes, Julie, I think that was the suggestion, that we had we had them broken up, whereas if you just go to the NISBA one, it's one. So I think, yeah. And I think Deborah tried to do that in 2410.
Right.
Yeah. My
So that-
understanding was that
Okay.
Emily wanted me to follow the NISBA template.
Right.
But
No,
right, and
are we bringing in, like, from 2410, we actually had the list of the groups. So did you want to bring those in from our old policy instead of having a lengthy discussion about recreating groups or whatnot? That, I guess that's where I'm going with this.
Sure. I'm trying to see, yeah, in ours, it said the superintendent shall be responsible for identifying the individuals and groups. Oh wait, that might not be the one, sorry, wrong sentence. Where do you see the groups listed, Julie? On
it's
our,
24,
The
it's
third
our 20.
paragraph, it's the last sentence of the third paragraph. The superintendent should base his or her recommendations on the output, or on the outcome of
outcome.
studies or the judgment of the professional staff or study committees. So
Okay.
it doesn't say seek input, but it says base recommendations. I'm fine. Seek input, base recommendations. I'm okay with that. I mean,
yeah, okay. Okay, so that can be done there instead of that sentence in italicized. And then on the second page of the draft, under adoption, the last sentence that's in italics under the first paragraph says, in order to be adopted and become effective, a policy must be approved by a majority of the board. I didn't see that sentence anywhere in the NISBA sample template, so I glommed it from another sample policy and put it in there. It kind of goes without saying that it requires a majority vote, but I didn't want to take anything for granted. Any comments about that, Julie? Oh, Larry, I'm sorry, I see Larry's hand raised. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think simplicity is better than complexity. Everything we do has to be by majority decision. We've said that. People know it. We've said we're the legislative body. That's the way legislators work. I don't think we need to repeat things in every policy that are found elsewhere. I like our policies to be as short and sweet as possible.
Okay, anybody concur with Larry? Larry, I see your point.
I agree with Larry.
I see Julie shaking her head. Okay, so that comes out. And Julie, did you want to say something?
Larry already stole my thunder.
Oh, Larry. All right. So then there's option A and option B, and those are options that appear in the NISBA template. Option B is basically the language that we currently use. So I
think we
didn't know
should
if
keep,
the board.
I just recommend we keep our current language, which is the superintendent or his or her designee shall consult with the school attorney as necessary prior to the adoption or revision of any policy, which is what we've been doing anyway. So
Okay.
I think we should leave it as is.
Okay, we agree? I see head shaking, yes. Okay, then under implementation, there's a bracket I have where I took a sentence from another sample policy that says, the superintendent shall ensure that personnel are familiar with board policies and administrative regulations that affect them directly or indirectly. Where necessary, the board will direct the superintendent to ensure school staff is following policies. At a minimum, a copy of any new or revised policy shall be distributed to, and then you list the group. So in the brackets was information taken from a different sample policy. And then the following sentence at a minimum was taken from the NISBA sample policy. Comments on that language?
I actually, I go back to what Larry said and keeping it simple. I'm okay with not including it because you already said in the statement above that the
Right.
superintendent's promulgating all this information. I don't think we need to give a laundry list because who knows, the laundry list could change, which this is policy. So I'm okay with just keeping it after it, period, and not
I
including
agree.
the italicized brackets.
Okay, so we don't want to ensure that personnel are familiar with board policies?
But it says that
It
the
says that.
superintendent shall be responsible for implementing all policies adopted. This responsibility includes promulgating any necessary administrative regulation, ensuring that the policy is included in the board policy, and publicizing the policy as necessary to the persons affected. That's what that
Okay.
means, right? I think it's good. Although we don't, Dr. Shields, we still have a board policy manual. I think it used to be up at the district offices.
We have a physical manual in Dr. Heinz's office. Yes.
Okay, there you go.
Okay.
We also maintain it on our website. That's done by
Yes,
Cindy.
of course.
I think we changed wherever it was written, where it has to be updated a couple years ago. Is that in another policy?
Yeah, I think it is.
Right, because we all
yeah.
had a good laugh about the physical
The
copy.
actual manual. Yes, I know. I
Right.
think we did talk about it, Rachel, a couple of years ago.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, in the
Because I
next,
think, I think the policy used to say, I don't remember correctly, but I think it used to say that the policy is actually handed out to everybody. That it
Yeah,
has to be set, and we took that out because we no longer do handing out of policies.
there was, I'm with you, there was
was
some
the
archaic
agenda.
language about physical copies in certain
Physical,
places.
right.
It was the agenda. It was the board agenda and how it had to be like distributed to all the schools prior to the thing. That's what it was.
And policy. We talked
Really, I
about the
think it was
policy manual.
policies also. I think the policies had to be like posted in
Yes.
800 different physical buildings.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
I
no,
think
you're
it was
exactly
even
right also. Yes, no, you're right.
policy at the public library. Like I think even the public library was listed in there. It was like a
No,
little.
that's what it was. I was thinking the library was involved somehow.
The
And-
library does have an updated set of policies from us. Cindy gets it to them after every change we make.
Well,
Good job, Cindy. Anybody ever have an issue with their computer, you know where to go.
okay, so I'm going to assume, which I don't like to do, that nobody then wants the sentence that was inserted, the board's policy manual shall be considered a public record. The superintendent is responsible for posting, maintaining, updating all policies on the district website. And just stick with the board policy manual shall be kept in the district office and made available for public inspection. In addition, a copy of the board policy shall be kept in each school building and any location specified by the board. But do we want to?
Derek can say it will also be maintained on the website. We can add that one sentence saying it shall be kept in the thing, and a copy will be available on the website, or will be available electronically.
So then do we want to keep the sentence that says the superintendent is responsible?
No, I
for
don't think we need
posting-"
to mention the superintendent. I think we're just saying the policy manual shall be kept in the district office and made available for public request. In addition, a copy of the policy manual shall be kept at any location specified by the board and will be available on online, or just something like that. Just adding.
I agree, Larry.
That's where we keep
But
it.
On
in addition,
the
a copy of the board
website.
manual shall be kept in each. But see, now this goes back to what we were saying. Are we keeping a policy in each school building?
Well, that's,
I don't think we are. Didn't we just say we discussed this last? Dr. Shields, are we, is there a manual?
Since it is available on our website, I don't think it's necessary that we maintain it in
Correct.
our buildings.
Correct. So I think the board policy manual shall be kept in the district office and made available for public inspection upon request. In addition, a copy of the board policy, or in addition, a copy of a board policy or all board policies shall be maintained on the district website. In
Okay.
addition, what, you changing the wording? Go ahead.
I wouldn't say copy, just from a technical term, like it's not a copy on the website.
It's
Just
the
say,
board policies. In addition,
just like he
the board
said, in addition, the manual can be accessed online. Right? That's what.
Well, it's
Larry-
online on the district website, so it should be in
That's fine.
addition, all board policies. It could just be, it doesn't have to be manual. All board
Right.
policies can be accessed on the district website. In addition, all board policies can be accessed on the school district website.
Okay. Okay. Under review. Oh, I'm sorry, hands is up. I see hands, sorry. I see Nora and Larry. I don't know who was first.
No, I already said what I was going to say in Nor, so.
Nora?
I was gonna say something like 5 minutes ago when I put my hand up, but I think we moved on.
Okay, sorry.
Just
But
to be,
I do know now to look for those hands when I'm running a meeting.
okay, just to be clear, are we taking out the board policy manual, those couple of sentences completely, and replacing it just with all board policies can be accessed on the school district website?
No, we would keep the sentence that says the board policy manual shall be kept in the district office and made available for public inspection upon request.
Okay,
Period. In addition, then everything after in addition comes out.
okay,
And what we will insert is, in addition, all board policies can be accessed online on the school district website.
okay, thank you.
I just want to ask, just to clarify too, because we've said it, but I just want to make sure. We're taking out under implementation on the first paragraph there, the bracketed following sentences, we're not going to add those, right? Because we just said
Correct.
they were redundant and, okay,
Correct.
confirming.
Okay. Then under review, the intro paragraph is from our existing policy 2450. So I tried to integrate the parts of the policies that are going to go into oblivion soon. Is that okay to put it there? To keep it there? I see no objections, no anything. Okay, good. So, and then the following again was from the NISBA template. There's the option A or the option B. Option A is Port's current language. Let me just see. And then in the in the NISBA template, it says, in addition, the board will review the policy manual on and then you specify the time frame. And I believe in ours, it was on a periodic basis. I have to go back and see.
Yes, you're right.
It
Deb.
says on a
Periodic.
periodic basis, an update is necessary. So do we still like on a periodic basis?
I would vote to leave the way we have it written. I
Okay.
wouldn't put any specifics. To Larry's point, let's not be narrowing ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it'll be on a periodic basis, okay? And then option B comes out. And then again, the next paragraph, I pulled in the sentence from our existing policy 2450. The board will oversee and evaluate how policies have been executed by the school staff and will weigh the results. It will rely on the school staff, students, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all these documents are up on board docs for the public. Do we want to marry that sentence from 2450, or do we? I see Emily shaking her head. Yes.
Wait, I have a question. What is that?
Yes.
What is that really saying? What is that really saying that we're doing?
Just
It's-
clarify where we are. I'm sorry.
The very last paragraph on the draft for 2410.
The board will oversee and evaluate how policies been executed by the school staff.
And weigh the results. So that to me says the board has the responsibility of evaluating if the policies have been effective. Are school staff following the policies, and has it been effective?
Not
didn't
school
we
staff
earlier-
necessarily.
But
I'm
wait,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go
It's
ahead.
not, it's not school staff following the policies necessarily. It's based, I think the sentence says that the board will oversee and evaluate how policies are being executed and whether or not they're actually effective, like we do at every single policy committee meeting, right? We go through policies, we look at them, we see have they been updated, what has changed, what should change, is it working or not? So I think that's just a matter of practice for us, and it should just, I don't have a problem keeping the line. It's just what we do. That's what the policy committee does.
Maybe
So Julie,
I
Go ahead.
guess, can we just make it simpler? They'll just oversee and evaluate how policies have been executed and weigh the results. Something about the school staff and how we're going to rely on staff, students, in the community to provide evidence. That to me, I don't know, it muddies the waters or puts too much of a burden. We're just going to, whatever we need to do to look at, right, to evaluate, we're going to, period.
But
Agree.
it's really, isn't it really through the superintendent we get the information? I mean, to me, this sounds like, I mean, it's been in our policy apparently for however long that policy 2450 was in effect. But we're going to oversee and evaluate how executed by the staff and weigh the results, relying on the staff, students. I mean, to me, that's like out of our lane the way it's written. Not that that's not the information that comes up to us, so we hear in the street, but it just sounds like it's out of our lane to me.
well, this is from our existing policy.
I agree
Last
now.
time was reviewed was 1991. I understand Julie's comment. The words by the school staff are kind of redundant because who else is going to be, who else is this for, right? I mean, it's made so that school staff and administrators adhere to our policies. The last sentence, though, I think is our directive to the superintendent. I understand you're saying, is it a how? But if
Stop
we
after
want,
executed.
if we want the superintendent to come back to us with a report and we expect to understand the perspective of the students, or we want to understand the perspective of the students, then or the community, then I think we need to keep this in here.
Can I ask a
Julia-
question?
Surely.
Can you just help point this in the direction? I believe you're pulling language from 2450. And I have the original 2450 in front of me. Can you just tell us where that comes from in 2450? Because it seems like it morphed, is why I'm asking the question.
Okay, in 2450, I'm looking at the second, on our existing 2450, I'm looking at the second sentence. Excuse me, the second paragraph. And it says
Okay.
the school board will evaluate how policies have been executed by the school staff and will weigh the results. It will rely on the school staff, students, and the community for providing evidence on the effects of the policies.
That's not in 2450. I'm reading the second paragraph of 2450. The Board of Education will evaluate the effect of its policies and the manner in which they have been implemented by the administration. In such evaluation, the board may call upon staff, students, and community participation. Are we looking at different policies?
I'm looking at 2450. It's called Policy Review and Revision and Review.
On the website, the policy is different from what you just read.
That's so weird because
I'm looking at
in-
2450 that's on board docs that we're looking at, and I think that's where Dr. Shields was asking that question from, because that's not, wait, Julie, you're saying the website doesn't have what I read?
So I don't think so. The website says the school board will evaluate how policies have been executed by school staff and will weigh the results. It will rely on the school staff, students, and community for providing evidence on the effects of the policies.
When
Right,
was it
and that's-
updated, that policy? Because
It
we have
says
the
it was
one that's
approved 1991.
And right, and
so
I'm
the
on,
I'm sorry, I can
Policy, we have-
clarify that.
Thank
Yes,
you,
Dr.
Cindy.
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
just trying
Cindy, that would
to,
be very helpful, because I think what's happening is we're looking at two different documents
correct.
in
Um,
coming to the conclusion on this language, and I just want to make sure we're pulling from the same source, that's all.
Correct. I
Dr.
believe
Shields.
it was on a previous meeting and it was revised at the time, and anything that is in italics was what was discussed about changing in the policy, but it was never brought to a first reading. It was put on hold because the work session wanted to review all of the 2000 series. So anything that's in italics was discussed previously, but no definite changes were made because you wanted to bring back the 2000 series and try to
Thank you.
combine.
Okay, because I was going to ask why it's in italics, so thank you.
Yes,
Right,
you're
okay. So going back then, we did, I guess, have a conversation at some point, and that was the paragraph. So I'll read it. So if everybody, I think we should go to the board docs, but I'll read. Board docs says the Board of Education, I don't know how different it is than what Deborah read. The Board of Education will evaluate the effect of its policies and the manner in which they have been implemented by the administration. In such evaluation, the board may call upon staff, students, and community members. I may be talking out of turn. I know, I'm sorry, I read it, but I want to say something. I don't think we need, honestly, in my opinion, I would leave and go back to what Deborah had written in 2410 and say the board will oversee and evaluate how policies have been executed and will weigh the results. That's how I would change it. The board will oversee and evaluate how policies have been executed and will weigh the results.
That's
Because-
what I think too, and that's what I tried to
Right.
say before.
Because
Right.
if we say by the school staff, some of our policies, as evidenced by school board member conduct on social media, are not school staff only, right? There's board policy as well. So the board will oversee and evaluate how policies have been executed and will weigh the results, which is what we do all the time. That's our day-to-day. That's what I would recommend we change to.
Okay, and the rest of the sentence, it will rely on the school staff,
I would
students.
get
and
rid of
community?
it. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. Just that one sentence.
Does
what I
everybody
think.
agree?
And I think what I'm realizing, right, what we had said and what Cindy is bringing up is that we had said we had all these different little policies, and what we were discussing with regards to the way NISBA was doing it is creating just one master policy, which is 2410, as Deborah has put everything together for us. So that's what I think, and I think we're good, in my opinion, but I'll shut up. And I know I've been talking out of turn, and I want to explain sometimes the reason why. In order for you to go to board docs and see the document, you minimize your screen so you don't see all the hands up. I'm just pointing that out.
Okay,
so-
thanks.
Right.
That's why they
I don't-
invented dual monitors.
Well, I'm not as good as you, Larry. I can't tell
Yeah,
you.
that's what I've got going on here too.
I just want to say I completely agree about how Emily just said it. And I said stop after executed, but executed and we'll weigh the results, I think is the way to go, and take out that last sentence. I mean,
Okay,
I don't.
any objections?
The rest of it.
Any objections? Okay, good, let's move on. Next on the agenda is policy 2430. Part of this whole same.
So are we putting it for first
That's
reading,
first
Deb,
reading?
2410?
Well, it's, do we feel comfortable that because we have a lot of insertions, deletions moving around, do we feel comfortable we can put it on first reading? Okay. Okay, so now we're at 2430. Suspension of policy. So this was a marriage of the Scarsdale policy, the Locust Valley policy. I think there was also the Garden City policy. It's open to comments. I have two questions in brackets. One at the end of the fourth paragraph where I asked, do we want to say in the opening paragraph that a suspension is contingent on an emergency situation? Do we want to qualify that we don't, that only in emergency situations will we suspend a policy? Emily?
Okay, so I'm clear. We do not have this policy 2430, and it is
We-
not a NISBA.
130.
I'm
We
confused
do.
what we're talking, why are we talking about other school districts policies?
I don't see where the other policies are, except under the very last NISBA sample policy,
2410,
430 Hudson and Locust Valley, but the
Yes.
policy 2430 that's here is our original 1991, and that's just like a 2 sentence, right?
No,
there's draft.
that
There's
is draft.
policy 2430 up at the top. It's the second
So
draft
draft,
listed.
so I'm clear, Deb. Draft policy 2430 is what you put together,
Yes,
putting in people's policies.
yes,
Policy further down in board docs, policy 2430, suspension of policies, is our policy, the school, what we currently have. Correct,
yes,
right? Correct.
yes.
So you want to add wording to our current policy, is what you're
We
saying.
had talked about the fact that our current policy doesn't make any sense. It's a 3-line policy that says it's the policy that a policy will not under any circumstances be temporarily suspended. But then it says a citizen appeal concerning an adopted policy can be made. However, the appeal will result in an exception rather than suspension. However, other school districts such as Scarsdale, Hudson City, Locust Valley have provisions for the eventuality of when a policy can or should be suspended. And so, and that aligned with the information that NISBA gave to me, that a policy should not be suspended for individual reasons for individual people. But that.
Did NISBA give you a 2430? I don't know that, or was it part of something else of theirs?
It is, they do not have it. They did not have a sample policy for 2430, which is why I then went to find somebody else who had a 2430. Because sometimes you might want or need to suspend a policy. NISBA just counseled again, and I think I wrote this up and I gave it to the board.
Excuse me, did you do a draft, a 2430 based on these other policies? And if so,
Yes.
gather, where is it?
It's the first thing, Nora. It says draft
It's the second
2430
draft
in board
listed.
docs.
It's
The
the second
second
draft
item.
listed on board docs. So when I spoke to NISBA, they said that if the board wanted to, and I wrote this up and I sent it to the rest of you, I don't know when, but that if the board wants to entertain exceptions for specific policies, that be written into a policy. They do not have a sample policy 2430. So that's what sent me on the hunt to see which school districts did. And that's why I provided everybody with the Scarsdale, the Hudson City, the Locust Valley, to see how they handled suspensions of policies. And I kind of massaged the three together so that it would make sense.
Can I just ask the question, and I asked it at the last meeting, is this a necessary policy? Can we
Well,
have that conversation first?
sure. So when I spoke to NISBA, they said that if there is ever a time when you feel it's necessary to suspend a policy, then you need to have in place a policy and a procedure for suspending a policy.
Don't we have a policy that talks about that in the case of an emergency, the superintendent is allowed to basically do what is necessary to better the health and safety and outcomes of the school district? So wouldn't that in effect supersede a suspension of policy and give him carte blanche?
This is saying that the school board is responsible. I don't know where we have a policy that says the superintendent can suspend policies.
I didn't suspend policy. I just said he can make a decision based on an emergency situation, right? So I'm questioning when would a suspension of a policy be necessary? In an emergency or
in an
other?
emergency. In an emergency.
don't all our policies say an exception to the rule is always possible and is at the discretion of the superintendent?
Right.
Isn't
But
that
this
just
is the board, but this is the board deciding.
But the board
I-
doesn't,
you know,
but the board,
It's
what I
not.
guess I'm saying is the board doesn't decide. The board has set policies in place and leaves them to the discretion of the superintendent to make an exception rather than a suspension. So what you're saying is for us to have a suspension of policy, right? Which would mean that the board, and so what you've written or what the other districts have written is that we would have to go to a majority vote to suspend a policy. But isn't it in effect, don't we actually do that at every single policy committee meeting when we're reviewing a policy? We decide as a board whether or not we make changes to a policy? I guess,
Well-
I see where Deborah's coming from. I don't know.
This isn't an emergency situation. This is where, if we've reviewed a policy, 5 years ago, and now all of a sudden there's a situation that calls for that particular policy to be suspended for a week, a month, I don't know. But that's what this policy would cover. And I suppose we can ask our school district attorneys if this is something we need. The only thing I can think of where we spoke about, we never spoke about suspending a policy. I shouldn't say never. My recollection is when we were discussing the pandemic policy, that certain policies, we should be more liberal in, the school district should be more liberal in instituting those policies during a pandemic, such as attendance, homework, whatever it was. But that was different than wholesale suspending the policy. We've not suspended our homework policy. We still have homework. We haven't suspended the attendance policy. So to me, there's a difference. So,
But I don't know when. Okay, so I honestly think we should I think your suggestion with going to our attorneys is a good suggestion, because I
Okay.
don't know. And I think maybe we send him your drafted 2430 and our current 2430 and see if there should be reasons for change. I don't know. And I think to Julie's point, do we want to have a suspension of policy like as detailed? I mean, do we want to have, is there ever a time where the board should temporarily suspend the policy? And I don't know that. I guess this is because in my mind, all our policies are set up where we don't do suspensions, but exceptions. So again, these are technical terms, because when you suspend, it's just broad, in my mind, broad range. And according to this, the way you've written it up, we would then have to put it back into place. Like we suspended at a meeting, now we have to put it back in at a meeting. And I don't know why it wouldn't just be at the discretion of the superintendent or his designees to make exceptions to policies. So I guess that's the question that we should.
well, the suspension is temporary. In the third paragraph, the first line, it says, the suspension of a policy, rule, blah, 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 shall terminate automatically at the first public meeting following said suspension. So unless we wanted to keep the suspension longer, so we wouldn't have to do anything, just the suspension would automatically expire. But anyway, so let's give this to Howard with our current suspension policy and see what he says.
You have some hands raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know who was first. I see Larry, Rachel, and Nora.
I don't know if Larry was before me or not. I know I'm second, but I think maybe Larry's hand was up first.
Yeah, I think I
Okay.
probably was. I think, first of all, we have to realize an exception and a suspension are different things. If a student comes to us and says, I have a 79 average and the policy says I can't do something unless I have an 80 average, will you make an exception? That's an exception. And that is something that probably gets made by the superintendent, but the board has the right to ratify it. I think that the reason to potentially have a policy on the board level is that policy is the purview of the board. So to then say the superintendent or his designee can suspend policy basically means the board has no right to make policy, because if the superintendent chooses to undo every policy we have, he can. And so I mean, not that that's going to happen, but I do think there are times where we may need to suspend policy. For example, we have certain attendance policies now that are being suspended because we have kids learning virtually. Our policy talks nothing about being in school virtually. So we expect people to be in attendance in school. So as a practical matter, we sort of have suspended a policy. We've done it. The superintendent has done it. We haven't ratified it officially as a board. So the question is that something that we want the ability to do? So I do think turning it over to Howard to take a look at is a good idea. Out of the three you've sent, I think Hudson City is sort of the clearest, but and I think we should delineate what the difference between the board suspending a policy and the board making an exception at the request of the superintendent are different things. So in this case, I'm actually asking for more, even though I'm generally trying to get the one sentence
Well, I just want to,
policies.
but the last sentence says a citizen appeal concerning a board adopted policy may be made. In such a case, the appeal will result in an exception rather than a suspension. That's in there.
Correct. Yes. No, I knew it was in there. Just I think perhaps they should be separate paragraphs rather than just a sentence, just sort of to break out the fact one is a district-wide policy and the other is a specific instance of that policy being waived.
Yeah, it's its own standalone little paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay. Rachel, were you next or was Nora?
I believe I was next. So no objection to running it by Howard, but I'm with Larry on the point about an exception and a suspension being different. Just because we have the power to do an exception doesn't mean that we also shouldn't have the power to do a suspension. And I think when we discuss policy, I'm always thinking about what the role is of good policy. And I think the role of good policy is to offer flexibility and ease in doing things correctly when presented with whatever circumstances where you need to do it. And I think we know the superintendent has this power to make exceptions. However, the board plays a role in policy too. So I'm in favor of having this policy. We're living through a pandemic right now. This is a period of time where, even though we couldn't have imagined it, various things have been suspended. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. I think the board should have the ability, if it becomes necessary, to easily suspend policy. Without this policy in place, we would have a really onerous structure for getting rid of policy or changing policy, where you have to write a policy and have it in the committee and then have a first reading and then have a second reading. And if you're going to conceivably be in a circumstance that's an emergency, you don't want to have to either do things in a way that does not jibe with your policies and your structure to go around it and be quick, or have to do it slowly and laboriously when you need it to be done quickly. So I think, yes, let's ask Howard, but I think it's a good idea to have this policy, even if we think that most of the time we won't need it.
Okay, thank you. Nora?
I think we should talk to Howard and get his feedback and then continue the conversation. I mean, there's things in here that I'm concerned about, but I'd like to see what his take on is. I mean, we define emergency, but just skimming through it, I don't see any place before or after where the word emergency is even defined. So I think this would be in an emergency situation, we're saying that the board can potentially suspend policy. I mean, an exception, what's the other word? Suspend or waiver, what's the an exception is really like a waiver to the policy, right? If you're talking about on an individual, waive the superintendent would waive the policy, or somebody would waive the policy. But I think we should talk to Howard about it, because we have been in an emergency situation since March. And decisions have been made by the superintendent, but the board has weighed in. I don't know if we need something more definitive in a policy like this, but I can't imagine a situation closer to, an emergency than what we've been living in since March. And I don't know that we need a policy that says the board can suspend policies more quickly than, going through the regular process. So, which would be, reviewing the policy and deciding we don't need it and voting on it in the normal course.
Okay, so we will.
Deb, I think Rachel just put something in the chat.
Oh,
This is
okay.
in the draft policy, and is this the draft policy, Rachel, that was put
Yes,
together by
I
Deb?
think that's in the draft policy that Deborah provided us with.
Right.
It
Yes.
says,
Right.
an emergency shall be defined for purposes of this policy as any situation or set of circumstances that the board has reason to believe will close the schools or jeopardize the safety or welfare of the pupils or employees of the district.
Perfect. So
And
this
that's
is
also,
definitely the action step. I think you're right. We're all on the right path.
It
We
does. No,
should
I saw that.
send this to Howard and see what he
Okay.
says.
yep.
No, I'm sorry, I just want to clarify, were you responding to what I said about emergency? No, emergency is defined. What I'm saying is that it doesn't say, the policy itself doesn't say that the board can suspend temporarily a policy in an emergency.
That's why there's a bracket at the end of that very paragraph where I write,
Oh, I didn't
do
see
we
that.
want to say in the opening paragraph that a suspension is contingent on an emergency situation?
All right, well, if we were going to keep that in, yes, I would want to, sure.
All right, I see it's 11:02. I had actually asked that the administrative organization and operation template be added because I thought we would have time. But we'll stop now, out of respect for all the people who have to get back to work. And Cindy, I can coordinate with you if you want on the policy on policies template to make sure that our notes are all in sync, because I know there was a lot of back and forth. Anything of anybody to add? The next meeting is March 17th. We're green, if you're so inclined.
Deb,
Deb,
Mike
yeah.
had his hand up before. Did he have
Oh, I'm
anything?
sorry.
Did you have anything you wanted to say, Mike?
I did, but I don't want to prolong this meeting.
That's-
Actually, but Larry, it was actually geared toward Nassau BOCES. I wonder if they have a policy like this and how prevalent it may be within other school districts. I'm actually curious as to how many districts or a BOCES would have something like this, because
I'll take a look.
I'll be great. Thanks.
Thanks.
Also, Deb, before we end, there are two
Yes.
attendees, and if
Oh,
we want to
good.
go to community comments, I don't know if anybody
Please.
has any questions of the community. To all two of you, Adrian and Jessica, anybody want to input, have anything to say? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Listen, and if they don't, I have to say we all have to get the same shirt that Larry has. I love that shirt.
What does Larry's shirt say? I can't see. Eat, sleep,
Eat, sleep, taxes.
Okay, no, Adrian or Jessica have not raised their hand, so we have no community comments.
Just to recap, am I eliminating our current 2400, 2420, 2440, 2450, and 2460?
I have to, before I say yes, I need to go back and see which ones get subsumed. My gut sense is that 2400 becomes 2410 to keep it in line with the NISPA policy.
Correct.
There were
My gut is yes, Cynthia. My gut is yes to all your questions.
There were some though we didn't touch. There were some, that one was about administrative review. So I want to be careful before I say yes. Give me a second. So I think that our 2400 becomes 2410. 2450 gets subsumed into 2410. So 2450 will no longer exist. 2460 about policy dissemination gets subsumed into 2410. So 2460 will no longer exist. 2430 we're working on and sending to our attorneys. 2440 we're not touching. It's administration and policy absence. NISPA said that's an old one, that's a holdover from whenever, and we haven't discussed that, so I don't know that that's been subsumed. So I would keep 2440 because we have not reviewed that.
Okay.
Deb, I believe we're also keeping 2420.
Sorry, 2420, I didn't have that in my packet, but yes, that's the other standout weird administrative one.
Yeah, it
Yes.
references regulation, so I don't think it is part of what the work that's been done today.
Right, correct.
Cindy, did you get a complete understanding of that then?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. So again, our next meeting is March 17th. Hope everybody has a restful, safe, healthy break. And if there are no further comments, this meeting is adjourned. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.